This is Dr. Tami Dean, and you are listening to the Equity Hour podcast. I am so excited to be here with you today. My goal is that as a listener, you leave with new ideas, resources, and actionable steps for your educational community. Let's explore how we can use our voices for equity and social justice today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Equity Hour with me, your host, Dr. Tami. I am so excited for our guests today. We're going to get to dive into some what shouldn't be controversial, but is now controversial topics around equity. But I mean, what isn't controversial at this point anymore? But anyway, I have Shannon Quist with me today. Hello, welcome, Shannon.
Hello, happy to be here.
So happy to have you. Let me tell you all a little bit about Shannon. Shannon Quist is a PhD student in rhetoric at Texas Woman's University in Denton. She's the author of the novel Rose's Locket and the poetry collection Mirrors Made of Ink. Her master's thesis focused on an adoptee written narratives and resulted in a narrative theory she calls phantom worlds. Intriguing. Which examines the function of character-constructed fantasies in narrative. She recently gave a TEDx TWU talk about adoption and abortion, which is now available on YouTube. Welcome, Shannon.
Thank you.
Yeah, yes. And for listeners, I will link her TEDx talk in the show notes so you can take a look at that. Because of course you are going to want to run over and watch it after we talk about it today.
Yeah, it's a spicy one.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. I know we talked before, Shannon, about potential for stand-up comedian, and I think it's there. There's some good little gems, y'all, in this TEDx talk that you just have to listen to know. I'm not going to give away. I'm not going to be a spoiler. So we're not going to give away the baby with the bathwater today. But so, Shannon, one of the things that I always like my listeners to know and hear about is each of my guests' equity journey, because one of the things I talk about is there are lots of different avenues to the work of equity and inclusion. And I think it's really important for people to hear how people got involved in this work, and also that this work is not a one-time thing. It is not a sprint. It is a marathon. And you're like, she's like, yes, she's nodding. Yes. Like, it's this lifelong journey. Like, I think who we are when we start and enter the work may not be the same as we are today, which is, to me, what this work is all about, right? Like growing and learning and reflecting on how we engage and learn about other people. So I would love for you to share a little bit about your entry into the equity space.
I mean, definitely. So exactly like you say, it's been a long journey and I'm going to be here a lot longer.
Yes.
As you've mentioned, I'm an adopted person. I was adopted at birth, and I went through some real hard teenager years where at the time I thought, this is so wrong. Everything feels wrong, right? But at the time I didn't have the vocabulary to articulate how I was feeling and why I was feeling that way. A lot of times I reflect and think that my entry into this work, like the activism part, the speaking out part, the educating myself part, it really happened when I got divorced. I got divorced when I was in my bachelor's degree, and my daughter was 2, and losing a family, because you lose the family when you get divorced. It almost shocked my entire system into remembering, oh, I've lost a family before, right?
Yeah.
And so I went straight into my master's after my bachelor's and started looking into adoption. One of the first projects I did was a research assistantship looking at Edna Gladney. She's credited with removing the stamp illegitimate birth certificates. That's what know her for, and she's the adoption agency in Fort Worth is named after her, right? Because she did this great big thing. Well, we got into the research, and there's not actually any proof that
Oh,
she did that, that she was responsible for that. Now, she may have known some of the lawyers or politicians that were responsible for that.
yeah.
But by the time I came sniffing around, everyone had passed away and there was not a paper trail.
Oh, wow.
Right. And then I started looking into the Edna Gladney organization, the adoption agency, and immediately was very repulsed by their practices. And started realizing there's some things about adoption that I, an adopted person, have never thought about, have never seen.
Hmm.
And so, I went on this deconstructing journey and I wrote my novel. I went on to investigate adoptee written narratives in my master's thesis. And boy, when I tell you I was a different person back then compared to where I stand now, I wish I could go back in time and be like, you're going to be so radical, little Shannon.
I look, let's just be honest. I think we all would love to go back and tell our younger selves, like, you were going to get through this. You may not understand why you're experiencing this challenging moment in time today, but it will, all make sense. And recently, my daughter had asked me like a question about some challenging personal things I had experienced. I'm a domestic violence survivor, and she's like, "Would you change?" I was like, "Honestly, I don't wish that on anyone, but I don't know if I would change it because it's also like having lived and grown and moved through that, like made me who I am today." Right.
Yes.
So while, what's that saying? Like, instead of looking in the rearview mirror because it's smaller, like look through, the windshield, something like that. Somebody said something like that.
Right,
But
right.
I love that, right? Like, how can we say and think and have this talk to our younger selves, right? And I recently just did this meditation exercise where I like was supposed to meet my future best self.
Ooh, I'm intrigued.
Yes, right? And so you're imagining like what does your future best self say to you? What does she or he, look like? What is all of these things, right? And so how do we then move through the world thinking of ourselves and responding to what would our best self say to us when we move
Oh, that's
through this world?
beautiful. I
Yeah.
mean, immediately I'm struck with this sense of like, I know what that lady would say. She would
Hmm.
say, write more, double down, speak up.
Yes. Yes. And I think that that is the most important thing. Like, I know people are like, oh, no regrets. But I think part of no regrets is when you're seeing injustice, when you're seeing and know that there are things that are happening that are not right, that you use your voice, whether that's a verbal voice, whether that's a written voice, whatever that is, make change, right? Or just not let it
Absolutely.
happen because is your future self going to be like, why didn't you say something?
Exactly. Exactly. And silence and complacency they're so easy, but we cannot fall into that kind of thing. It's, it's just toxic and dangerous.
It is. And I think people sometimes think, well, I'm just one person, right? Um, which yes, you are. But one of the reasons I have this podcast is right, like, yes, you are just one person, but your journey, Shannon, may speak to someone else who's not sure if they want to speak out. And like by sharing your voice, you build a community and people feel less alone. And historically, as human beings, we have shared and connected with each other via story and narrative. And it used to just all be oral history, but now we have so many different ways to document our life experiences, right? And,
Yes, exactly.
you know, I mean, you've written a book, you've written some poetry. Those are both written, but they're different ways of sharing. And when I think about um your TED talk, okay, so I was like, "Whew." Okay, first of all, I love like Moses was the original adoptee. I was like, snaps, snaps. Like, so true, so true. But I think you bring up some really good points in there that I found really compelling and interesting, right? And I don't want to give away the whole thing, but one of the things that you talk about is, we had some shift in adoption. You talked about Roe versus Wade, and just for those that it's called Would You Rather, right? And her TEDx talk is about, adoption versus abortion and this versus that, which, let's be honest, it's not an either or type of situation, which is the point of your whole talk. But you talked about racism and adoption.
Yes. So that is a major point of the story that I think we willfully ignore because, well, on one hand, we're thinking about adoption and abortion as these binary choices, and they're not. They're just simply not. But the reason they're in conversation with each other at all is because of what happened in the second wave. So the baby scoop era ended essentially when Roe v. Wade was passed. And so all of a sudden there were, less white babies. Because back in those days, who were the people adopting? White Christians, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've sold America on this idea of the perfect nuclear family. There's a mama, there's a daddy, and there's little babies, and they live in a house, and there's a picket fence, and there's a dog, right? And so when women were struggling with infertility, this was sold to them as, well, don't worry, you can just buy a baby. You just buy one, right? Buy your washer machine, buy your, dryer, and buy a baby. So 1950s, like it just hurts. What happened was that the reason Christians turned against abortion was because they were trying to get votes for desegregating schools. And so they knew they couldn't run on that issue. And so they basically had to find another way to get their congregations to vote in their favor. And so they convinced them abortion. It's abortion.
Okay. So just to clarify, they were for or against desegregation when they lumped abortion together for their congregation?
They wanted desegregation. They wanted segregation.
Okay.
They wanted whites only schools.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Brown v. Board of Education
Mm-hmm.
passed. And so all of this desegregation was happening and they were pushing back against it.
Okay. So it's, that's really interesting to me how, history just always tends to repeat itself, which when people say
Right.
humanities aren't important, oh my God, they absolutely are, right?
They're so important.
Right. So, because okay, this isn't about this. I'm like, sorry, I have like thousands of thoughts going through my head right now, and I'm trying to decide which one I want to pick up on. But like to me, this goes back to when we think about Jim Crow, like historically, like poor whites used to be in alignment with blacks because they were actually the most similar in lack of access, discrimination, like all of these things.
Right.
Until like powerful, wealthy whites shifted the narrative like, hey, you want to come at privileges like us. So come be a part of us. You don't want to be over there because we're going to do these things. And this is like the least historically inaccurate restating of this, y'all. Like look up the history, the real history. But you know what I'm saying? This is kind of what had happened, right? Like this is the Cliff's Notes version, y'all. like come be with us because you don't want to be a part of that. Interested in learning more about equity coaching for you or your educators? Sign up for a free connection call with me, Dr. Tami, to discuss a personalized plan. The link is in the show notes.
Some of that happened in adoption too. Georgia
Yeah.
Tan was selling babies to all kinds of people in Hollywood, you know, and so Hollywood stars are, and Edna Gladney, she's featured in a 1940s movie, and it gave a burst to the adoption industry, and that's what it became. It became an industry.
Oh, for sure. And we see it today. Wealthy white persons in power are making decisions that only benefit other white, wealthy persons, but the majority of the people supporting them are not white, wealthy persons because that narrative is still existing. So when I think about equity and diversity and inclusion, we think about like social narratives. And this just to me is like one of those social narratives, right? And you brought up Reagan. God, we can thank Reagan for so many things. Like even like the drugs, like just that whole thing. Like I had not realized that Reagan was such a huge catalyst for this adoption versus abortion belief
Right.
that we now sort of buy into, that the collective propaganda has taught us that it's an either or situation. And like you were just saying, like, right, like there is like a million shades of gray in between those two options.
Right. Right. There are. And if you want to talk about Reagan, I don't know if you heard the news, but this week, Dr. James Dobson just passed away. And he was the founder of Focus on the Family. I jab at him in the TEDx.
Yeah.
And he actually, Dobson, he founded Focus on the Family, this Christian evangelical group that helped parents parent their children into godly adults, which is obviously what I am. But he served as an advisor not only for Reagan, but also for Trump in 2016.
Mm.
And so he lobbied against LGBTQ persons. He supported beating your children. And importantly, even though he said at some point in the 70s that the Bible doesn't talk about abortion at all, he famously became very big, very anti-abortion. And so he not only influenced families around the country, he influenced politics around the country.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to come back because to talk about like the baby scoop and what that is, because I don't know if everybody kind of knows what that is, and then kind of what happened when the the white evangelical, I can't speak today, Christians, decided to lump in abortion to their cause.
So, I mean, the baby scoop era was kind of towards the end of World War II into the 70s, like when
Mhm.
Roe was passed. And it was just this really, and like past World War II, everything got really weird in America. Like we often harken back to those days, right? We have a lot of nostalgia for the 1950s for some reason.
Mhm.
And because nuclear families were so heavily like marketed, I guess,
Right.
that's kind of when adoption sprung. And, you think about a lot of corporations that are still standing today, they began in the 1950s. There was kind of this like just economical resurgence, and adoption got onto the bandwagon. The evangelical stuff didn't really come around until the late 70s.
Okay.
I mean, Roe had passed and everything was groovy, as they may have said in the 70s, there was all of this like uprising. There was Vietnam going on, second wave feminism going on, all of this like anti-racist stuff.
Yeah.
Awesome. It was a wonderful civil rights era.
Yeah.
And and the evangelicals were pushing back against the civil rights stuff, and somehow abortion got roped into it. And then James Dobson and others got into Reagan's ear, and that's, I think, when it really got pretty political.
Yeah. And really stayed
Yeah, it's got
political.
staying power, so
Yeah. Which, you know, of course, we had the recent overturning of Roe versus Wade. And so I'm curious, when we, in the adoption versus abortion argument, how do you, like, what have you seen in your work with how that overturning of that really essential legislation has come into play um more recently?
I mean, it's harming people. It's harming people because now, instead of a guaranteed right across the country, it really depends on what state you live in.
Mm-hmm.
And I live in Texas, so not great. Women are dying. Women are dying. I was really disturbed to see earlier this year the woman in Georgia
Mm-hmm.
who was pregnant. As you know, she was essentially dead.
Yeah.
But they kept her body alive to keep the baby alive and then put her to rest after the baby was
Came to term.
came to term. Um, I think a lot of it is just how we look at women in this country, right? Because I will say that, like, when Roe v. Wade fell, um, some very important people on the Supreme Court are adoptive parents. And that's part of my political frustration is that we have adoptive parents who are high up. They're on the Supreme Court. Governor Greg Abbott of Texas is also an adoptive parent, and they're using their power to harm.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett did an interview, or maybe this was in one of the oral arguments, I think, and she said in reference to safe havens that the baby boxes where women can just deposit the baby into a box and leave it. Well, that's the
Yeah.
problem. That's the problem. It's solved. If you don't want the baby, then just drop it off. But that doesn't account for complications of pregnancies. It doesn't account for any kind of accountability to provide records of any kind to that child, which is deeply irresponsible. I mean, I hesitate to say lucky because that's a little bit of a trigger word, but I am lucky that I at least had records of my parents, you know,
Yeah.
and could later go on and find them. Babies who are deposited in safe haven boxes do not. They don't have records. They're left alone in a box. I mean, can we not treat babies like this, please?
It is wild to me that we remove the woman who is, and sometimes not even a woman, sometimes it's a child carrying a child
Right.
out of the equation. And the regression into shaming of women for being pregnant in the first place,
Yep.
right? Really does go back to what you were talking about, like this enamorization with like the 1950s and all of the shame around, being pregnant, having sex before you got married, right? But it also, this false love for that ignores all of the other things that weren't in existence. Like, it is, women could not even have their own bank account and credit card until 1972. I was
Right.
born in 1976.
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
so, like, it is not that long ago.
Well, and what, marital rape wasn't even outlawed until the 1990s.
Right.
Yeah.
So, this idea again that women are second class citizens to even unborn children
Right.
is just wild to me. Like, my mind cannot wrap around how someone can be like, yeah, this is okay. And to me, this is like, the patriarchy is still very strong, everyone. That is why these things are being decided. And I don't know that everyone realizes, like, we all grow up with these like social norms that we aren't even necessarily spoken, but because of like how we're spoken to, what media says, like what, like this idea of the nuclear family, like the myth of meritocracy that exists in the United States, like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, like even
Right.
the idea of, how we think about sex and alcohol and all of those things. If we look at the United States compared to, quite honestly, the majority of the world, they don't have as much shame associated with some of these pieces, especially around your body.
Right. And it
And
is so much about the body, right?
mhm, yeah. And it's just like, where do we go from here, right? Because yeah, the overturning of that also means that women are not getting needed health care
Right.
because, natural miscarriage is a it is a common thing. It happens. And I mean, I know you know this, but sometimes when that happens, it doesn't fully, release from the body, and you need to have a DNC in order to, clear
Right.
out your uterus, right? So you can live. Women, and you see these stories in the news all the time, women can't even get that
Because
to,
their health providers are scared.
yeah, yeah. And I remember, okay, so I grew up Catholic.
Oh boy.
And I remember in high school going through the sacrament of confirmation, right? And
Oh boy, yeah.
they had a pro-choice speaker come in and gave us like this pin that was supposed to represent, a fetus's feet at a certain amount of time, which, as an adult now, that's actually totally false. Like the feet aren't even that developed at the time that they said it was. So I don't even know where I'm going with this story, except that people need to learn how to dig into the history of things, or like, is this actually true? Is this propaganda? Is it speaking to ethos, pathos, like all those things? Like,
Right, right,
it's devoting
exactly.
an emotional, we can't kill babies. Oh my gosh. What was that? Do you remember that? Where someone's like, it was like a presidential debate or something about killing babies. Like it was saying something about a state, and like a baby was born. And like the rep was like, no, in no state is it legal to murder a child after sport.
Oh, yes, I do remember that. Oh my gosh. But yes, a post-term abortion.
Yes, like this
No,
is
that's just murder.
right. Like, but this is the insanity of the things we're going through. So, okay, I feel like I've like taken us like a totally into left field, but like to me, it's like all related, right? Like
It
all of
is
these
all related.
these things. And so we say your choices are adoption or abortion, right? Like, and we're saying that in a good, bad
Yeah. Good,
duality.
bad, life, death way. Because death is abortion and life is adoption. But it's just not that at all. Like I could go into so many like what if scenarios that would just, we don't even have time for them all.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is like, we all deserve to have our individual stories play out the way that we want them to play out. Abortion needs to be available. Unfortunately, the way that the adoption industry works right now, I don't think it's working, you know? So I've recently been looking at this story because I began all of this research as like recovery, right? Trying
Yeah.
to recover these lost voices and identify the propaganda, break it down. But this is a bigger story than I think we realize.
Mm.
I think that there is this parallel between adoption and how we're selling babies, we're separating them from their families legally, right? And settler colonialism, separating the natives from their land, taking their children into boarding schools, adopting them out, making them assimilate to the white culture. I, adoption is not only a symptom of that, it parallels it on the family level. Does that make sense?
It does make sense to me because when we think about, and I know you talked about and touched on this a little bit in your TED Talk, who is adopting and who is adopting which children and
Right.
how are those children having access, right, to, culture, racial history, awareness around how you might adopt a child that is outside of your race, but how their life experience might be different
Right. Right.
than
Absolutely.
yours.
Yeah, I was adopted by a white family. I know you can tell it by looking at me, but I genuinely was so whitewashed that I couldn't tell it about myself looking in the mirror. I am Mexican. I have a deep love of chips and queso that I have denied for so many years because for my emotional safety and well-being, I had to deny it. Does that
Mm,
make sense?
yeah.
Yeah. And so, it's not just like the legal separation, although that is a factor because adopted persons, they, in many states, the majority of states in America, their original birth certificates are sealed. They can never access them. And they're issued new birth certificates that list them as the biological offspring of their adoptive parents. The birth certificate is not a medical document, it's a legal document. It's a it's a fiction.
Yeah. That is, I didn't even know to say that. I didn't even know that. Like, that is wild to me. Like, why? Why would you list adoptive parents as the birth parents? Like, they're not birth parents, they're adoptive parents. Like, why not build, and I feel like this is almost a rhetorical question, but why not build a legal document that says birth parents, adoptive parents? Like, why not name it what it actually is?
Because
And
that would strip adoptive parents and the agencies of power and money. That's why.
what, okay, because I don't know, like, what power do they get by hiding that information?
The adoptive parents historically have this fear of the birth parents coming back, trying to seize the child back. So the legal protections are a way to say, no, we own this child. Here's the paperwork to prove it. Here's the birth certificate where our names are listed. Here's the divorce decree. We paid money. And of course, the adoption agency they've got to make their money. I can just see you thinking, and I'm sorry, I'm dumping all of this on you.
No, that's the whole point of yes. And you know, I am sure those of you listening, we just needed to pause for that for a moment because the idea, right? that an adoption agency is there to make money versus being a social service
Right.
is wild. Because I would guess that most of you listening right now think of adoption agencies as social services. And if they're social services, they're not there to make money. They are there to support people,
Yeah, well,
theoretically.
theoretically, but in all reality, when I was researching the Edna Gladney Center in Fort Worth, domestic adoptees in current day and age, babies who are born here in Fort Worth, uh, they go for about 45 grand. You want a baby from Fort Worth? It's 45 grand.
Which
You should get a car instead.
that's about the going rate for a car nowadays, which is wild. Okay, so that dollar amount, which, you know, people know adoption isn't inexpensive, just like treating infertility isn't inexpensive. None of these
True.
things are inexpensive, right? To me, this also brings up an equity issue of access,
It
right?
does.
Who are we trying to make sure meets the quote unquote narrative of the ideal family?
Right.
They,
Adoptive families are mostly wealthier.
right? Well, obviously, because if it's $45,000,
Abby. Yep.
are you worthy? To me, this also goes back to this other narrative about like, are you worthy to have children? And who is worthy, right? To do that, to raise children. And so we've made it very expensive. There's and then on the flip side, the irony of this to me is then you're going to force people who maybe are like, I am not, like, one of those gray areas is like, I am just not in a financial or mature position or whatever the decision is to
Whatever it
have a
is.
child right now, right?
Right.
Children are inexpensive.
And then there's the further of these women who are not financially able. The adoption agency is getting $45,000 when in reality a birth in hospital fees maybe costs 7 grand. Like what I like to tell is the story of the day I was born, right? I was born. My parents were there. They released me from the hospital. I should say all three of my parents were there. My adoptive parents came and picked me up from the hospital. They released me 2 days old. My mother stayed there, my birth mother.
Mm-hmm.
She got sick. And so she stayed in the hospital. I'd already been taken.
Yeah.
And then after she was finally released, they released her straight out onto the streets. There was no social services that said, hey, do you, need housing? Do you need help?
You need some counseling. You just gave a child you
You
carried
need
for 9 months.
some
What, you know?
counseling? Nope. She had served her purpose. They turned her out onto the street. No compensation. She did live in the maternity home during the pregnancy, and she was
Mm.
taken care of there. She was given housing and food or whatever. But boy, the moment she delivered the product, it was over.
I don't know why I'm getting flashes of Handmaid's Tale right now, but I am in my mind. Like,
Earl, I tell you.
but like that, like women are just incubators for babies.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also thinking about women who are, forced to carry to term, maybe in a more challenging economic state. And at the same time, we're saying you have to have this child, but then we're cutting all services to help them support the child. They
Right,
don't have, like,
exactly.
right? Like, at the same time, we're making these decisions in tandem. And I don't think people are necessarily thinking about how that affects the overall experience or life of the mother and the father or right, the caregivers of this child and the child itself.
Right, right, exactly. And I think again about like the separation that's happening here because in all actuality, we like to talk about adoption as if it's just a birth mother, just a baby, and just the adoptive parents. But in reality, that birth mother has a family.
Mm-hmm.
You know, can an aunt take care of the baby? Can the grandparents step in? Is there a best friend down the street? What's going on? We've separated people from their communities,
Yeah.
and then we're making profit off it. We're making profit off of these familial separations. We're making it legal. We're putting it in ink, and just I ran out of steam. I'm just so mad.
I don't even, okay. So I don't even know what to say anymore. Like that's where I'm at right now. And like that is very rare that I am a speechless person.
Let's just call spade a spade. Like, I usually got something to say.
For real. Sometimes I don't always say it, but there's always just something going on up in this little head of mine. I'm really feeling some sort of way about this. So I guess I want to just kind of like, I think we've given so much for people to think about in what we've been sharing. So I guess I would like us to kind of think about two things as we kind of wrap up our conversation for today. Like, one, do you have any thoughts on what might help mitigate moving away from this dichotomy? And then two, what is sort of one thing you want the listeners to take away from something they should do or could do when it comes to thinking about equity and racism and all the things related to adoption and abortion?
Well, I think for the first bit, personally, I am an abolitionist. I believe that we have to dismantle the system before we can build back something better. But I recognize, obviously, that in the way of most projects like this, we do have to have a sure, but in the meantime,
Mm-hmm.
and for that, I think that we need to start listening to all of the parties involved in adoption and even related communities like foster care and conceived people. They're having a really big moment right now. All of these people who in some way are dealing with severance from their families. They have really important things to say, and they say it across the spectrum of you'll hear all kinds of stories.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. And also, like, I see a lot of really great work going on in like the social work and therapy corners, like people who have been through these kinds of traumas and life situations, they need support. And I'm glad to see that more and more people are recognizing that this is a very unique situation that needs unique support.
Yeah.
Um, can you ask the second part of the question again?
I absolutely can. The second part was, right, listeners might be feeling a little bit overwhelmed too. And so I really like them to leave with like, what is one thing you want to suggest that they could do or they could think about as they maybe try to do their own work in this area or learn more?
Yeah, I mean, I think listening is honestly some of the best advice here because there is a lot of stuff everywhere. And when you Google it, you will come across it. Um, listen and engage with it in good faith, obviously.
Mm.
Don't be a troll, just listen and ask your questions. Because I think that's how we learn and it's how we build community with each other. And I think that I really come from like a feminist background. I mean, how could I not? Um, but this idea of like coalition amongst different groups of oppressed minorities.
Yeah.
It's not just women, it's not just adoptees, it's not just LGBTQ plus people, it's all of us. We
Yeah.
all have to band together and you know, rise up against racism and ableism and homophobia and xenophobia and all of the things. We're stronger together. So just being in the room while a conversation is happening is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and honestly, resting. A lot of my work, I kind of flit in and out of the public eye. And that's because I recognize that I always have to get back up, right?
Yeah.
And shout into the ether in the hopes that somebody hears me. But I also have to rest, you know?
Yes.
And that is very important self-care because this kind of work is ongoing. It's going to be a lifelong journey, and it's not going to end with my lifetime, your lifetime.
Right.
All of this is going to continue going. So we have to take those moments, rest, have a drink of water, and get back up.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with the part about rest. Um, because it can feel like this is so overwhelming and you just have to keep going and just keep going, like just keep swimming. And you
Swimming.
do, but you have to,
You
right?
do.
You
Yeah,
do have to rest. I really lean into like rest as resistance. And if you haven't
it
read
is.
that, you should, right?
Yes,
Um, and I love what you said about community. I talk about community a lot on the podcast because I really believe we are meant as humans to live in community. We are meant to share in community. We are meant to grow in community. And you're right. We've been isolating and isolated. And when we do come together, there is power. So, like each individual, right? That collective is where the change happens. So, it may start with one person, but as you grow your community and reach out and connect to other people, um, that's really where the change happens. And the change happens in sometimes those smallest moments that you don't even think that it's going to happen in. So
exactly.
thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I know, like I've told you all, like this is a journey. Like I am learning. Like this is an area that I am like, oh, I need to like now I'm like on fire. Now I'm like I need to learn more about this. And so I encourage you to dig in. I'm going to link the TEDx talk in the show notes. Please check it out. And remember, please use your voice today. Thank you for joining us for another episode. Shannon, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a great time.
This wraps up another episode of the Equity Hour podcast with me, your host, Dr. Tami Dean. Make sure to check out the show notes for any resources, links, and next steps from today's episode. Head on over to Instagram and give us a follow at Dragonfly Rising LLC for more tips, resources, and opportunities to connect. Thank you so much for joining us. And remember, intent is not enough. Action is necessary. How will you use your voice today?